Hello students, today's agenda is to check homework. We'll be multiplying complex numbers and you will be able to work on 1.7. Today students will be able to multiply complex numbers. And before we start, I would like to show you some information that you already might know, and it's the inverse operations. So addition and subtractions cancel each other. Multiplication and division are inverse of each other, so they cancel as well. And the square root of something is the opposite of x squared, meaning that number is square. And so these are some examples. If you start with 10, you add 5, that's 15, but then you subtract 5, you go back to 10. So as you can see, adding and subtracting the same number cancel each other. If you have 10 and you divide by 2, you get 5 times 2, you get 10 again. Again, you start with 10, but then you divide it and then multiply, and that cancel each other, so you go back to the 10. Finally, if you start with 25, you take the square root of 25, you get 5. But then if you have 5 and square that, you go back to 25. Again, taking the square root of something and raising to the second power, you go back to the answer. Okay, so they cancel each other. Okay, so let me begin with multiplication of complex numbers. But before we start, if you recall from previous lesson in this unit, I squared is equals to -1. And why is that? Well, we learned and we already simplified that the square root of -1 is equals to I. We already practiced that. But if you raise both to the second power, and to the second power, that becomes I squared. And in here, this square cancels with this, which is what we just learned. The square root and the square cancel each other, so you end up with -1. So that's where this statement comes, that I squared is equals to -1. So let's put that into practice. So we have 3 plus 2i. That's a binomial, meaning two terms, and we'll learn more about terms later on. 2 minus I, again two terms, so that's called a binomial. And I think you have seen it in modules as well, where we're multiplying two binomials. So when we're multiplying in here, I just call it like double distributive property, because you're multiplying the 3 times each of the terms inside of the second parenthesis. And after you've done that, you get the second term in the first parenthesis and multiply it also by the 2 terms on the other side, or the other parenthesis. And so I'm going to keep it with the same color so that you keep track of it. So 3 times 2, 6. 3 times -I, -3i. For the next one is 2i times 2, 4i. 2i times -I, well, positive times negative is -2, and you have 2i, so it's I squared. Why? Because remember that in multiplication, we add the exponents, okay? Keep the base and add the exponent. So 1 plus 1 is 2. And so in here, because we have this I squared, we're going to replace that with -1. And we're multiplying the -2 times that -1. At the same time, we can combine like terms, so we have -3i, positive 4i, and the 6 in here. So I'm going to bring down the 6. If I have negative 3i and positive 4i, different signs we subtract and leave the sign of the greater one. 4 minus 3 is 1, and it's positive, but since we have the I, we don't need to put the 1 in there. Okay? In here, negative times negative is positive. 2 times 1 is 2. And because of that, we ended up with a constant number. So now we have more like terms. So the I, you just bring it down. And 6 plus 2 is 8. So that's it. That's the answer. Again, the first thing is to do distributive property with each term from the first parenthesis. Once we have that, if you have I squared, you replace it by negative 1. Okay, by negative 1. And you can do that little part on the side. Okay. At the same time, you combine these like terms. Negative 3i, positive 4i is I. Bring down the 6, and the answer from here is negative 2 times negative 1, positive 2. And again, you combine the constants. So I plus 8. Okay. Number 2 is 6 minus 3i times negative 2 plus 5i. Again, double distributive property. They call it FOIL as well. So first, oh, and they do it like this. First, 6 times, maybe I should put it first. 6 times negative 2 is negative 12. Outside, meaning the 2 outside. So 6 times 5i is 30i. And then, oh, outside, I'm sorry. Inside, negative 3i times negative 2 is negative times negative becomes positive, and 3 times 2 is 6, and you only have one I, so you just put it in there. And then you have last. Okay, that's what they call FOIL. Negative times positive is negative, and 3 times 5 is 15, and I times I is I squared. Okay, we'll do that on the side and combine these like terms. So we know that anytime I have I squared, that's negative 1. So I bring down the negative 12. I combine these like terms. Both are positive, so it's just positive 36i. We're adding them, so we don't add the exponents, okay? Only in multiplication. And then from here, we get negative 15 times negative 1 is positive 15. Now we combine these like terms. We bring down the 36i. Different signs we subtract and leave the sign of the greater one. So 15 minus 12 is 3, and the greater sign is plus. So it's going to be 36i plus 3. Okay, number 3. Sometimes we're just going to have one term outside and multiplying it by terms or a polynomial inside. And so in here it's just single distributive property basically. So 4 times I is 4i. 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. We don't have like terms, so that's it for that one. Another one, if I have 5i times 2 minus I, again, it's just a single distributive property. 5i times 2 is 10i. 5i times negative I is negative, because positive times negative is negative. And then 5i times I is 5i squared. Remember that this becomes the negative 1. Okay, as soon as I see that, negative 1, and bring down the coefficient. And so this is going to be brought down the way it is. So it's like doing that on the side in the middle, right? Negative 5 times negative 1, positive 5. And we don't have any more like terms, so that's it. Okay, number 6. Did I do number 5? No, I didn't. So number 5, I'm sorry about that, missing 5. I might have just the sign, which is something that we saw in the previous lesson, but without, we had more things in here. Again, in here is like having a negative. All it does is change the signs inside. So negative times positive becomes negative 1. Negative times positive becomes negative 5i. If you get confused, you can just, whenever you see a negative between parentheses, you can just put a 1 in there so you don't get confused. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 times positive 5i, negative 5i. And that's it. These are not like terms. Some teachers prefer to see it. I don't mind if you leave it like this. I know some teachers prefer to see it with the variable first. And so you would bring that negative with the 5i and negative 1. Okay? So either way is fine for me. Other teachers might prefer this one. Okay. Just doing a couple more that are a little simple, but sometimes those little simple ones, because they have little tricks, then they might get confusing. So negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Negative 2 times 9i is negative 18i. Again, ask your teacher, because your teacher might prefer this. Okay? They might prefer the one with variable first. Okay, let's get some more of those that are a little bit more complex, because you get one more of that practice, right? Okay, so again, the double distributive property. So 2 times 9 is 18. 2 times negative I is negative 2i. Three times I is 3i times 9 is 27i. And 3i times negative I is negative 3i squared. The square comes from multiplying two i's, okay? This becomes the negative 1 times the coefficient. And these are like terms. Oops. I'm using little clouds for the i's, so let me try to keep it. So you bring down the 18. When we combine these together, we get 25i. Why? Because different signs we subtract and leave the sign of the greater one. So 27 minus 2 is 25, and positive because it's the greater sign. And in here, negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3. We combine the constant numbers, and so we have 25i plus 21. Okay, and that's it. Okay, let me do 2 more and then I'll let you do your work. So negative 2 minus 3i times negative 1 minus 2y. And again, the double distributive property, so the negative 2 times each term, negative 2 times negative 1, positive 2, right? Negative times negative, positive. And then negative 2 times negative 2i, positive 4i. Then the other distributive property, so negative 3 times negative 3i times negative 1, positive 3i. Negative 3i times negative 2i, positive 6i squared. Two things that we're going to be doing here, again, combining like terms, and on the side, do this negative 1. Okay, the I squared is equals to negative 1, and multiply by the coefficient. So we're going to have 2. Both are positive, so it's going to be positive 7i. And 6 times negative 1 is negative 6. We combine the constant numbers, and so I have 7i and negative 4. Why? Because different signs we subtract and leave the sign of the greater one. That's Rocky, my dog. He wants to be in the video. At least he's barking. Okay, so the last one, I have I plus 2 times negative 3i minus 2. Again, just remember that if you have plus in the middle, you're not multiplying. You just bring down, and combine like terms. If you have subtraction in the middle, you multiply the negative 1 times the second term and then just combine like terms. In here, we don't have anything, and I don't have an eraser, but we don't have anything that means that it's multiplication. Okay, very important to remember that, because that's one of a few students will confuse that. You don't multiply if there is a plus or a minus, only if there is nothing. Okay, so I'm going to do the double distributive property. So I times negative 3i is negative 3i squared. I times negative 2 is negative 2i. Then I do the second distributive property. So 2 times negative 3i is negative 6i. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. I'm going to do the same thing. I see that the I square is right here now, so it's going to be negative 3 times negative 1 right here. I'm going to combine like terms, and this one you're just going to bring it down. I'm just going to make sure here, positive times negative is negative. There you go. Okay. Okay, so in here, I get negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3. In here, I combine like terms, same sign you add. And so I get 2 plus 6 is 8i. But then you get the sign of the greater one, which is negative. And bring down the 4, the negative 4. I combine the constant numbers. And so this negative belongs to the 8i, so that stays there. If I have different signs, I subtract and leave the sign of the greater one. So 4 minus 3 is 1, and the greater sign is negative. So that's it. And so with this now you can go ahead and do 1.7 and have fun.